You did not stop wanting to be loved. You learned to trust only the kind you had already paid for. Someone sets a cup down beside you on an ordinary evening without being asked. For no occasion you can name, your chest goes still. Before the warmth reaches you, your mind is already searching for what this will cost, and your hand is already moving towards something to give back. You call that gratitude. It moves faster than gratitude. Gratitude arrives after the gift has landed. What you feel arrives before it. In the half second, while the kindness is still in the air, and something in you needs to close that gap before it can open into anything wider. This is the part nobody prepares you for. You expected the difficulty of not being loved. You did not expect the difficulty of being loved for no reason you could verify. That one arrives quietly, disguised as a small awkwardness, and you have been calling it a personality trait for years. For most of your life, love had a mechanism. You knew exactly where it came from. It came from being useful, from being reliable, from noticing first, from needing little and offering much. The mechanism was tiring. It was also completely legible. You could read it, you could work it. And the legibility was the reward. If love could be earned, love could be predicted. If it could be predicted, it could be secured. You were not only working for affection, you were working for the certainty that affection would not disappear one morning without explanation. So when someone gives you something you did not generate, the floor shifts slightly, not because the offer is unwelcome, because it arrives from outside the system you built to keep love from becoming unpredictable. And inside that system, anything you did not earn is something you cannot guarantee. Watch what you do next. You laugh a little. You say they did not have to. You immediately mention something you could do for them this week. Within moments the balance is restored and the strange open feeling is gone. And you tell yourself you were simply being polite. You were not being polite. You were correcting an imbalance that felt intolerable. The phrase "you did not have to" is not modesty. It is an instruction. It tells the other person that the transaction was unnecessary, and it quietly returns the account to zero before anything can accumulate there. You may have named this humility. You may have named it independence. You may have described yourself as someone who is simply bad at being taken care of, as if this were a small quirk, like disliking crowded rooms or forgetting names. It is not a quirk. It is a position, and the position had value. In Jungian terms, what you build here is close to a persona, the social form that made you belong, the one who gives, the one who arrives early, the one who is easy to have around, because being around them costs nothing. A persona is not a lie. Yours was constructed out of real generosity and real attention. The pain begins only when it is mistaken for the whole person, and when the whole person can no longer step out from behind it without feeling exposed. Because here is what the giving position preserves. The giver sets the terms. The giver knows what is being exchanged and how much it is worth. The giver can measure their own standing at any moment by looking at what they have contributed. The receiver knows none of this. So it was never only generosity, it was also the safest seat in the room. From that seat, you could be close to people without ever being at their mercy. You could be loved for something you controlled, which meant you never had to discover whether you would be loved for something you did not. Notice that this is not the story you have been telling yourself. The story was that you gave too much and people took too much. That story is not false. It is simply not the deepest layer. Underneath the exhaustion, there was an arrangement you were also protecting. And now someone is trying to give you something, not a favor you can log, something quieter. Attention on a day when you produced nothing. Patience when you were unpleasant. Care extended toward the version of you that was not performing anything at all. Your body answers before your mind does. The breath goes shallow and high. There is a small stiffening across the shoulders, the same one that appears when a conversation is about to require something. Nothing is being required. That is precisely what your body cannot pass. Because if they are giving to you now, when you have contributed nothing, then they are responding to something in you that you did not put there deliberately, and you have no idea what it is. You cannot see it. You cannot inspect it. Most of all, you cannot maintain it. This is where the fear actually lives, not in the debt, in the exposure. A love you earned can be kept up. A love you did not earn can be withdrawn at any moment for reasons you will never be able to trace, and you will not even know which part of you failed. So you keep the ledger open, not out of coldness, out of a desperate wish to know where you stand. The ledger is not greed. It is a map. It tells you how much affection is currently available and what would be required to restore it if it dropped. And people who love you feel this. They feel the small refusal inside your thank you. They feel the speed with which you convert their care into a task. Some of them stop offering, and you experience this as confirmation that love always did have conditions. It did not always have conditions. Sometimes you simply made the unconditional version impossible to deliver. That is not an accusation. It is the most difficult thing to see in yourself, because the pattern was built long before you had any say in it. Somewhere behind this, there was a period, and it does not have to be dramatic, when the warmth in your life became reliably attached to what you provided. Perhaps you were the one who helped. Perhaps you were praised for being easy. Perhaps the household relaxed when you handled things and tightened when you needed something handled. Nobody had to say the rule aloud. Rules like this are learned through timing. You noticed when the attention arrived, and you noticed what preceded it, and you built the rest yourself. Then you carried that structure into every adult room you have entered since. What Jung would call a complex is not a memory. It is an old emotional structure that organizes your reaction before conscious thought reaches the scene. That is why the calculation happens in half a second. That is why you have already reached for something to give back before you have decided anything. Which means the difficulty you are meeting now is not a failure of the work you have done. It is the point where the work becomes real. Anyone can recognize a pattern. Sitting still inside a moment where the pattern is not needed is a different task entirely. And it is harder than it looked from a distance. You imagined that being loved without earning it would feel like relief. It often feels closer to weightlessness. And weightlessness is not restful for someone who has always used effort to keep themselves oriented. So you find reasons to become useful again. There is always a legitimate one. Someone is stressed. Something needs organizing. A call needs making. The relief when you return to the giving position is immediate. And you mistake that relief for how much you enjoy helping. Some of it is enjoyment. That part is real, and it should not be dismantled. but underneath there is also a return to solid ground. And the ground is solid because in that seat you know precisely what you are worth and exactly how the affection was produced. The strange part is that you already know what you want. You want to be loved for something other than function. You have wanted it for years and said so, and grieved its absence in relationships that only ever knew what you provided. And now, when it appears, something in you goes quiet and begins looking for the door, not because you were lying about the want, because the want and the equipment to receive it were formed at different times, and only one of them has had practice. That gap is where you are currently standing, not broken, not ungrateful, simply arriving somewhere your history did not prepare you for, holding a cup that someone brought you for no reason, waiting for the arithmetic to start and finding, for one uncomfortable moment, that there is nothing to calculate. What you called a fear of intimacy was never fear of closeness. It was the moment when closeness stopped requiring anything from you, and you discovered you did not yet know who you were when nothing was being asked. And that discovery does not announce itself. It arrives as a slight restlessness in a room where everything is fine. You are sitting with someone who wants nothing from you, and there is a low hum under your attention, scanning for the task that is not there. The scanning is old. It was once the most intelligent thing you did, long before you could name what you were doing. You learned to enter a room and locate the need in it, because locating the need was how you located your place. That skill built your entire adult architecture. Look at where you ended up, the friend everyone calls when something breaks, the one at work who absorbs the part of the job nobody wants, the partner who handles logistics so smoothly that nobody notices logistics exist. None of that was accidental. You did not stumble into being the reliable one. You selected for it, again and again, in 1,000 small decisions that felt like kindness at the time and functioned as construction. Because a life organized around contribution has one enormous advantage. It never requires you to ask. Asking is the exposed act. Asking says, there is something I need that I cannot produce myself. And that sentence, spoken plainly, was never safe to say. So you built a structure where asking became unnecessary. You anticipated, you handled things before they became requests. You made yourself so consistently available that your own needs never had to be voiced, and therefore never had to be refused. This is the reward that kept the arrangement alive. Not praise, not gratitude, immunity from refusal. If you never ask, you can never be told no. And if you can never be told no, you never have to find out what you are worth to someone when they are inconvenienced. Jung described a kind of repetition where the old pattern quietly arranges new situations until its logic becomes visible. Yours did that. It found people who needed a great deal. It found workplaces with gaps shaped exactly like you. It kept confirming its own rule. And every confirmation felt like evidence about the world. Look how much people take. Look how little comes back. What you could not see was that the arrangement had been selecting for that outcome, because the alternative would have required the one thing it was built to prevent. Now something has changed. The old role has weakened, whether through exhaustion or through a relationship that refused to play its part. and you are inside a stretch of life where the structure no longer organizes everything. This is what you wanted. It is also disorienting in a way you did not anticipate, because the structure was not only a burden, it was orientation. It told you where to put your attention, how to measure a day, what constituted a good one. Remove it, and the day arrives without instructions, and you find yourself standing in your own kitchen, slightly unsure what to do with your hands. Someone offers to help you with something, nothing large. They notice you are carrying too much, and they take half of it. And there is a fraction of a second where you nearly refuse before you catch yourself and let them. And then, walking beside them with lighter arms, you feel something that is not relief. It is closer to embarrassment, as if the likeness were visible, as if a stranger passing could see that you are currently being carried and would draw a conclusion about you. Watch that carefully, because the conclusion you fear is very specific. It is not that you are weak, it is that you are ordinary, that you are a person with limits like everyone else, and that the extra thing you brought, the endurance, the not needing, was never as remarkable as you needed it to be. Here is the layer under the debt. Being the one who gives did not only protect you from refusal, it made you slightly exceptional, not superior in any way you would ever admit aloud, but distinct, set apart, the one who could always manage. And exceptional is a lonely position that pays well. You may have complained about it for years while quietly relying on it. Because if you are the one who never needs anything, then you are not simply another person in the room hoping to be chosen. Receiving takes that away. When you accept care, you join the ordinary human traffic of people who need things from each other. There is nothing distinguishing about it. You are just someone being helped, indistinguishable from anyone else being helped. And something in you experiences that as a demotion. This is the part that makes mutuality so much harder than generosity. Generosity keeps a small distance built into it. There is a giver and a receiver, and the giver remains, in some quiet way, the larger figure in the exchange. Mutuality collapses that in mutuality nobody is the larger figure. The exchange stops being measurable and starts being continuous, and you lose the only instrument you have ever had for knowing where you stand with another person. So the discomfort is not that you feel as indebted, it is that you feel unmeasured. And after a lifetime of navigating by measurement, being unmeasured feels less like freedom and more like standing offshore with no sight of land. There is something else here, more uncomfortable to look at. You have spent years privately keeping score of what other people failed to give you, the friend who never asked how you were, the parent who took and took, the partner who assumed. That ledger was real, the imbalances were real, but notice what the ledger also did. It kept you convinced that the shortage was entirely on their side, which meant you never had to examine the part of you that made the giving direction one way. What Jung called projection works quietly here. You met your own withheld capacity in other people, their inability to receive you, their obliviousness, their taking. It was easier to see the failure of reciprocity in them than to feel your own hand pushing care away. Some of them were genuinely not offering, Some of them offered and were declined so smoothly that neither of you registered it. Both things happened. Holding both is harder than the clean story where you gave everything and were given nothing. And the unlived part is here too. Not a grand abandoned dream, something smaller and more persistent. The experience of being known by someone who was not being helped by you at the time. That has been postponed for most of your adult life. You know how to be loved for what you do. You have almost no data on being loved for how you are, and because you have no data, you cannot predict it, and because you cannot predict it, some part of you continues to treat it as a rumor rather than a fact. So the present difficulty is not that you refuse care. Increasingly, you accept it, you let people help, you say thank you and mean it. The difficulty is what happens in the hours afterward, when the care has landed and you begin, almost automatically, to plan the repayment. That is the residue, not refusal. Delayed conversion. The kindness sits in you for a while as something warm, and then the old machinery starts up in the background and begins turning it into an obligation with a due date. And you can feel the moment it happens. There is a small tightening under the breastbone, a shift from softness into task. The warmth does not disappear. It gets filed. It becomes something you now owe rather than something you were given. What would it mean to leave it unfiled? To let a kindness remain in you for a full day without converting it into anything? Not as a discipline, not as a practice with a name, simply as an experiment in tolerating an open balance that nobody except you is counting. You do not know yet whether you can do that. You know only that the conversion happens fast, that it happens without consultation, and that you have never once let the warmth stay in its original form long enough to find out what it would become. The first thing you discover, if you try it, is that the warmth does not simply sit there, it moves, left unconverted. A kindness begins to feel less like a gift and more like a question. And the question is the part you have been avoiding all along. The question is why? Why this person, on this day, chose to bring you something, and there is no answer available to you, because the answer lives inside them, and you have no access to it, and no way to secure it. That is the difficulty nobody warns you about. Receiving requires you to let another person hold the reason. You do not get to know why you are being cared for. You have to live inside their reasoning without being able to inspect it or improve it. Conversion solved that. When you turned care into a debt, you took the reason back into your own hands. Now you knew exactly why the exchange had happened, because you had just installed the explanation yourself, and the explanation was one you could act on. So the ledger was never about fairness. It was about authorship. As long as you were repaying, you remained the author of the relationship, and nothing important could happen in it that you had not helped arrange. Sit with that for a moment before it hardens into self-criticism, because it should not. Authorship was not vanity. It was how a person who could not rely on being chosen made certain they would not simply be left standing there. But it has a cost you can feel now. In your ordinary week, when someone is warm toward you, you experience it as pressure rather than pleasure, not because they are demanding anything, because their warmth is unmanaged, and unmanaged things have to be watched. Watch what happens in your shoulders during a compliment. They lift very slightly, the way they do before answering a difficult question. The praise has not landed anywhere. It is being held at arm's length, examined for accuracy, checked against what you actually did, and if the praise is for something you did, you can accept it. You will still deflect it, but you can accept it. If the praise is for something you are, it slides off entirely, and you change the subject with a skill you have never noticed you possess. Here is the reversal underneath that. You have always described yourself as someone who does not need much. What is closer to true is that you have never allowed anything in that you could not verify. Not needing was never asceticism. It was quality control, because an unverified love could turn out to be a mistake. Someone might be seeing a version of you that is not accurate, and if they are, then what they are giving belongs to someone else. And the moment they see clearly, it will stop. So you kept the exchange in the verifiable register, effort in, appreciation out. That currency never lied to you. It never required you to trust another person's perception of who you were, because their perception was never the thing being tested. And this is why mutual affection can feel thinner than being needed. Being needed had intensity. Someone in crisis reaches for you with total urgency, and that urgency feels like proof. Ordinary steady fondness has no urgency in it at all. You may have noticed this and been ashamed of it. A calm relationship where nobody is drowning can feel strangely flat. Not because you want chaos, because calm affection does not generate evidence, and you have been running on evidence for as long as you can remember. There is a shadow here, and it is worth naming carefully. Some part of you may prefer being necessary to being loved, not consciously, not as a wish, as a quiet gravitational pull toward the situations where your value cannot be questioned. This does not make you manipulative. It makes you someone who learned early that the safest form of belonging is the kind that would be inconvenient to lose. Being loved can be reconsidered. Being indispensable cannot be, at least not quickly, and there are relationships in your life that have been shaped by this without anyone intending it. People who came to you with problems because you were most present when they had them. People who never learned to give to you because the position was never vacant. You have grieved those relationships as one-sided. They were also, in part, arranged. Both things are true, and holding them together is more honest than the version where you were only ever the one being taken from. Now, from that history, someone offers you something and you feel a small resistance rise. The resistance is not ingratitude. It is loyalty to an arrangement that kept you safe for decades. And loyalty does not dissolve because you have understood it. So expect the difficulty to persist for a while after the recognition. This is the part where people assume they have failed. You have not failed. Recognition changes what you know. It does not immediately change what your chest does when someone is kind to you without cause. What can change first is smaller. The gap between the impulse and the action. You still reach for the repayment, but there is now a half second where you notice yourself reaching, and in that half second something else becomes possible. You might, in that gap, do nothing, say thank you and stop there. No offer, no counterbalance, no mention of what you could do for them next week, just the thank you, left alone, without the second sentence that usually rescues you from it. It will feel unfinished, almost rude. There will be a small anxious pull to add something, and if you do not add it, you will spend the next few minutes vaguely certain that you have been ungracious, and you will be wrong. That discomfort is not a signal that something is going badly. It is what an unclosed loop feels like to a person who has closed every loop for 40 years. The nervousness is not moral information. It is unfamiliarity, wearing the costume of guilt. And underneath the discomfort, if you stay long enough, something quieter appears. A small, unexpected steadiness. The relationship did not collapse because you failed to repay. The other person is still there, unbothered, not keeping the account you assumed they were keeping. That may be the most disorienting discovery of all. Most people were not counting. The ledger you have been so carefully maintaining, so anxious to keep balanced, has existed almost entirely on your side of the table, which means the exhaustion of your adult life was not only imposed on you, some of it was administrative. You were maintaining a record nobody had asked for, in a system nobody else was using, and paying interest on debts that had never been issued. There is grief in that. It is worth letting it be grief rather than converting it immediately into a lesson. Years of effort that went toward securing something that was, in several relationships, already being freely given, and there is something else beside the grief, unfamiliar and slightly awkward. If most people were not counting, then some of the warmth you received across those years was real and unearned, and you did not let yourself have it at the time. You cannot go back and receive it retroactively, but it does change what is standing in front of you now. The offer being made this week is not the first one. It is simply the first one you have looked at directly instead of immediately balancing. So the capacity is not arriving as relief. It is arriving as something clumsy that you are doing badly and cannot stop noticing. The thank you that stayed alone, the lightness that felt like exposure, the kindness that sat in you for most of an afternoon before the machinery started, none of that is transformation. It is smaller than that and harder to dismiss than it was a month ago, because you have now felt the alternative from the inside, and the old arrangement has lost the one thing that made it unquestionable. It no longer feels like the only way to be loved, but it does still feel like the way you are known, and that difference shows up first in the reactions of other people, who have been living with the earlier version of you for a very long time. Someone will notice, not dramatically. A friend will say, "You seem different lately," and there will be a slight uncertainty in how they say it, because they cannot tell yet whether the difference is good news for them. A family member may put it less gently, that you have become distant, that you used to be more involved, that there was a time when they did not have to ask you for anything because you were already there before the asking began. And they are describing something accurate. You were there before the asking, and your being there made a particular kind of relationship possible, one where nobody ever had to say a need out loud, including you. That arrangement is now less reliable, and its absence is felt on both sides. What they are meeting is not coldness, It is the end of an anticipation service they had come to experience as your personality. Some of them will adjust. They will begin asking for things directly, which is more awkward for everyone and considerably more honest. A few of those relationships will get better in a way neither of you expected. Others will drift, not out of malice. The connection was organized around a function, and when the function becomes intermittent, there is less holding it in place than either of you assumed there was. That drifting will hurt, and you should let it. Not every relationship that thins out was false. Some of them contained real affection built on top of an arrangement, and the affection can be genuine while the structure was still doing most of the work. The people who stay will be the ones who can tolerate you being an ordinary person in the room, someone who occasionally needs something, someone whose value is not continuously demonstrated. That is a smaller circle at first, and a considerably less exhausting one. There will also be a period where you get the balance wrong in the other direction. You may refuse help out of principle, or accept it stiffly, or announce that you are working on receiving, which is its own way of managing the exchange. Let that be clumsy. There is no elegant version of this. You are learning something most people learned in childhood without noticing, and you are learning it as an adult with a full history and a functioning ledger you cannot simply delete. What changes is not the ledger disappearing. It is the ledger becoming one voice among several rather than the operating system. It still totals things up. You are simply no longer required to act on every calculation the moment it completes. And ordinary life begins to contain small things it could not contain before. Someone brings you a coffee and you drink it while it is still hot, instead of putting it down to go find something to do for them. That is not a triumph. It is a Tuesday. A friend calls to talk about nothing, and you stay on the phone without waiting for the real reason to appear. You notice, halfway through, that you have not been useful for 20 minutes, and that nothing has gone wrong. Someone tells you they are glad you exist, and it lands somewhere in your chest rather than sliding off. And you do not immediately produce a reason why. You sit in it for 2 full seconds before the machinery starts. 2 seconds is a considerable improvement. You will still convert things. Most of the time, probably, the conversion is quick and old and does not consult you. But you will catch it more often, and catching it is not the same as stopping it, and catching it is enough for now. There is a version of this recognition that turns into another performance, and it is worth naming so you can see it coming. The person who is now diligently practicing receiving, monitoring their progress, treating openness as a project to be completed well. That is the old structure, wearing new clothes. Receiving cannot be achieved. It is not a competence you acquire and then possess. It is closer to a willingness to remain present while something arrives that you did not organize, which means there will be no moment where you have finished, no day when the tightening under the breastbone stops. You will simply find in more of your ordinary weeks that it is not the only thing happening, and there is a truth here that has to be held alongside the difficulty, because losing it would make all of this smaller than it is. You genuinely love giving. That was never only defense. The attention, the noticing, the wanting to make things easier for people that is real, and it is yours. What changes is not the giving. It is that giving stops being the toll you pay for presence. You can bring someone soup because you wanted to, and not because you were quietly securing your position at their table for another month. That may be the first time your generosity has been fully yours. For most of your life it was doing two jobs at once, and only one of them was love. The other was insurance, and insurance is expensive, and you have been paying the premium for decades. You may grieve the old arrangement even so. It was competent. It gave you a place in every room you entered. There is something genuinely lost when you stop being the person who always manages. Even if what you lose is a weight, both of those can stand together. It cost you a great deal, and it also carried you through years where nothing else would have. You do not have to condemn it to stop living inside it. And the people who loved you through it were not only using you, many of them loved the person and could not find her behind the function, because you had made the function so seamless that there was no visible seam to reach through. Some of them are still trying. That is worth knowing. The offers being made to you this month are not new offers. They are old ones, repeated patiently by people who have been waiting for a version of you that could hold them. You are not yet that version consistently. You are a person who now occasionally lets a kindness stay in its original form for an afternoon before filing it, and who notices, with a kind of quiet surprise, that the afternoon was better for it. That is where this actually sits, not in transformation, in a slightly wider gap between the gift and the repayment, and in what has room to grow inside that gap. The love was never the thing that had to be earned, only the certainty was, and the certainty was never available to anyone. So you are learning to be loved without proof. It is uncomfortable, and it is quieter than you expected, and it asks nothing of you except that you stay in the room while it happens. The kindness stayed, and nothing was owed for it.